December 7, 1941, 7:48 a.m., the skies above Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The first wave comes out of the north. 353 aircraft, Zeros, Kates, Vals, descending through broken clouds. Engines humming in formation so tight they blot out patches of pale morning sky. Below them, the harbor sits still and gleaming. Battleship Row stretches along Ford Island. Like a string of sleeping giants, the USS Arizona, the USS Oklahoma, the USS West Virginia, massive steel hulls reflecting Sunday morning light, their crews still eating breakfast, still writing letters home, still entirely unaware that the world they know is approximately 4 minutes from ending. On the bridge of the lead Kate torpedo bomber, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida surveys the scene below and feels something close to disbelief. The Americans haven't moved. No anti-aircraft fire, no fighter cover. The fleet is there, all of it, sitting motionless in water so calm it looks like glass. He raises his radio transmitter. Tora! 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 Tiger! 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 The code word for a complete tactical surprise. The signal that ripples back across the Pacific to Admiral Chuichi Nagumo aboard the carrier Akagi, to the Imperial Japanese Navy General Staff in Tokyo, to Emperor Hirohito himself. The Americans did not see them coming. What happens next takes less than 2 hours. Torpedoes slice through the harbor. Bombs punch through steel decks and detonate inside engine rooms. The Arizona takes a bomb down, her forward magazine, and disappears in a fireball so enormous that sailors on ships a mile away are knocked off their feet. She sinks in 9 minutes, taking 177 men with her. The Oklahoma rolls over completely, her hull rising above the waterline while men pound their fists against the steel from inside. The West Virginia absorbs 7 torpedoes and settles into the mud, still burning. The Nevada, the only battleship that gets underway, takes bomb after bomb, trying to reach the open sea before Japanese pilots, ordered to sink her in the channel and block the harbor, drive her aground near Hospital Point. In 110 minutes, the Imperial Japanese Navy sinks or damages 21 ships, destroys 188 aircraft, and kills 2,403 Americans. It is the most devastating naval attack in American history. Half a world away in Tokyo, the celebrations begin almost immediately. Military officials gather. Champagne, rare, Western, symbolically delicious, is opened. Newspaper editors scramble. Radio announcers can barely contain themselves. The Imperial Japanese Empire had dealt a blow so precise, so catastrophic, that American naval power in the Pacific had been effectively eliminated. The Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch, East Indies, Singapore, all of it now lay open. The resource-rich corridor Japan had been strangling itself to reach. The oil, the rubber, the steel was suddenly, almost impossibly within reach. In the streets of Tokyo, ordinary citizens weep with joy. And in the war rooms, the admirals toast. But in one corner of one room, a man does not raise his glass. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack itself, sits quietly. His face carries an expression that no one in the room quite knows how to read. Not grief, not doubt, exactly. Something more dangerous than both. Clarity. Yamamoto had studied in America. He had driven through Texas. He had walked through the steel towns of Pennsylvania. He had watched, with his own eyes, the industrial machinery of a nation that produced things in quantities that other countries simply did not have words for. He had spent time at Harvard. He knew the American character, proud, slow to anger, and once provoked, absolutely relentless. He had opposed this war. He had argued against it in private meetings for years, warning that attacking America would be like awakening a sleeping giant. He had been overruled, and then, loyal to the Emperor, loyal to the Navy, loyal to the only life he had ever known. He had planned the attack himself, planned it brilliantly, executed it almost perfectly. And now he sat in the quiet of the celebration and said the words that no one in that room wanted to hear. I fear we have only awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve. The room carried on celebrating. Yamamoto set down his glass. He knew something the others did not, or rather, something the others refused to know. The real target at Pearl Harbor had not been the battleships. It had been the aircraft carriers, and the carriers had not been in port. The Enterprise, the Lexington, the Saratoga, gone at sea, untouched. And somewhere deep in the American continent, in the shipyards and the steel mills and the factory floors that never slept. Something was already beginning to stir. December 8, 1941, 12:29 p.m., the United States Capitol Building, Washington, D.C. The chamber is so quiet you can hear the ventilation. Franklin Delano Roosevelt grips the podium with both hands, his leg braces locked beneath the weight of a nation that has just been hit in the face. Around him, 308 members of Congress sit in absolute silence. The galleries above are packed. Outside, thousands of Americans cluster around radio sets in living rooms, in diners, in barbershops, in factory break rooms. Every ear in the country turned toward the same frequency. Roosevelt looks up from his notes. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked. He speaks for 6 minutes and 30 seconds. Congress votes for war in less than an hour. The Senate vote is unanimous, 82-0. In the House, a single dissenting vote is cast by pacifist Representative Jeanette Rankin of Montana. She will later say she could not vote for any war, any time, anywhere. History will remember her vote. It will also remember that she cast it completely alone. The United States of America is now at war, but declarations are paper, wars are steel, and the steel, the real answer to Pearl Harbor, does not come from Congress. It does not come from Roosevelt's fireside chats or from the generals mapping strategy in wood-paneled rooms. It comes from somewhere far less glamorous, far more powerful, and far more specifically American than any of those places. It comes from the shipyards. Within 48 hours of the attack on Pearl Harbor, the phones are already ringing at the Kaiser shipbuilding yards in Richmond, California, at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia, at Bethlehem Steel's Four River Shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts, at the New York Navy Yard in Brooklyn, where workers who heard the radio broadcast on Sunday afternoon had already begun showing up at the gates. Monday morning, before any official call-up, before any government order, simply because they understood, with working-class clarity, what needed to happen next. They didn't wait to be asked. They just showed up. To understand what America was about to do, you have to understand what America was in December of 1941. The country had spent the 1930 bonus in the grinding misery of the Great Depression, millions unemployed, factories idled, breadlines stretching around city blocks. But the Depression had done something unintentional. It had created a vast reserve of desperate, disciplined, hungry labor, men and women who knew how to work hard and had been denied the chance to do it. The New Deal had retrained workers. The Civilian Conservation Corps had built roads and dams and bridges and, in doing so, had trained a generation in large-scale industrial construction. By 1940, even before Pearl Harbor, America had already begun rearming quietly, carefully at Roosevelt's careful urging. The Two-Ocean Navy Act of 1940 had authorized the construction of 257 new warships, including 18 aircraft carriers and 7 battleships. Contracts had been signed. Steel had been ordered. Engineers had begun drawing plans. Pearl Harbor didn't start the machine. It simply removed every remaining reason to keep the throttle anything less than fully open. On January 6, 1942, exactly 30 days after the attack, Roosevelt stands before Congress again. This time, he doesn't come with grief. He comes with numbers. He calls for the production of 60,000 aircraft in 1942, then 125,000 in 1943, 45,000 tanks. In 1942, 75,000. The year after, 20,000 anti-aircraft guns. 8 million tons of merchant shipping per year. The numbers are so large that members of Congress actually laugh. Not from disrespect, from sheer disbelief. Those numbers are not a budget proposal. They are not a wish list. They sound like a misprint, like someone dropped an extra zero somewhere, like someone confused monthly figures with annual ones. 60,000 aircraft? In 1 year? The entire United States Army Air Forces had fewer than 3,000 operational aircraft on December 1. 7th, how do you produce 60,000? Roosevelt looks out at the laughing chamber and does not smile. These numbers will be exceeded, because already, in the cold January dark, in cities from Portland to Baltimore, the yards are moving. At the Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California, Henry J. Kaiser is doing something that professional naval engineers say is theoretically impossible. He is building Liberty ships, massive, 441-foot, ocean-going cargo vessels, using prefabrication techniques borrowed from the automobile industry. Instead of building a ship from the keel up in one location over many months, Kaiser's workers manufacture sections in different parts of the yard simultaneously, then weld them together like enormous puzzle pieces. His first Liberty ship, the SS Star of Oregon, takes 196 days to build. Kaiser looks at that number and decides it is embarrassing. His engineers go back to work. Within months, the average construction time drops to 42 days, then to 30, then, in a carefully orchestrated publicity stunt designed to shock both the American public and Japanese intelligence analysts, Kaiser's Richmond Yard No. 2 constructs the SS Robert E. Peary from keel laying to launch in 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes. 4 days. The Peary is 245 tons of ocean-going cargo ship, built in the time it takes most people to take a long weekend. In Tokyo, Japanese naval intelligence receives the reports from their agents on the American West Coast. They read the production figures. They study the photographs of the Richmond yards, the scaffolding forests, the welding arcs visible from miles away at night like captured lightning, the launching ramps running, so hot that ships slide into the water before their paint is fully dry. The intelligence officers write their assessments. Some of them include the numbers without comment, as if the numbers speak for themselves. Some add cautious qualifications. Perhaps the Americans are exaggerating for propaganda purposes. Perhaps these figures cannot be sustained. Perhaps. But one officer, a naval attaché who had served in San Francisco and watched the Richmond yards from the hills above the bay, simply underlines the construction figures in red ink and adds a single handwritten note in the margin. This cannot be stopped. He is right. But the admirals in Tokyo are not yet ready to hear it, because in the spring of 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy is still running wild. Yamamoto has his 6 months, and for now, the Pacific is still theirs. For now, April 18, 1942, 9 a.m., 200 miles east of Tokyo, Japan. The deck of the USS Hornet pitches in a heavy sea. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers sit lashed to her flight deck, their olive-drab fuselages slick with ocean spray, their twin engines cold and silent. They are enormous aircraft, land-based bombers, that have absolutely no business sitting on a carrier deck. Their wingtips hang so close to the edge that deck crews won't walk between them and the ocean. The Hornet's own fighter squadron has been struck below, locked in the hangar deck, because these 16 strangers have taken every inch of available space. Standing near the lead aircraft, Lieutenant Colonel James Jimmy Doolittle checks his watch. The mission was supposed to launch 400 miles from the Japanese coast, close enough to reach Tokyo, far enough to give the bombers, which cannot land back on a carrier, time to reach. Friendly airfields in China after the raid. It was already a one-way trip. There were no guarantees anyone was coming home. But 12 hours ago, a Japanese picket boat spotted the task force. It was sunk immediately, but not before it transmitted a warning, which means the element of surprise is gone, which means the choice is simple. Abort the mission entirely, or launch now, 170 miles, earlier than planned, and accept that the fuel margins, already razor-thin, have just become something closer to a mathematical prayer. Doolittle doesn't hesitate. He climbs into the cockpit. What the Doolittle raid actually accomplishes in military terms is almost nothing. 18 tons of bombs dropped on Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, Nagoya. Minor damage. No strategic targets destroyed. Of the 80 men who fly the mission, 3 are killed and 8 are captured. By Japanese forces in China, 3 of the captives will be executed. The aircraft are all lost. The raid cannot be repeated because the element of surprise, once spent, is gone forever. But that is the wrong way to measure it. The raid lands in Tokyo like a psychological earthquake. Japanese citizens had been told, had genuinely believed, that the home islands were invulnerable, that the Pacific was a shield, that the enemy was too far away, too damaged, too demoralized to strike back so soon. And then, 4 months and 11 days after Pearl Harbor, American bombs fall on the Emperor's city. The shock is absolute. In Washington, the effect is the opposite. The country erupts. Newsrooms blast the story across every front page in America. Roosevelt, when asked where the bombers came from, smiles and tells reporters they launched from Shangri-La, a fictional paradise from a popular novel. The real answer, a carrier deck in the middle of the Pacific, is a secret that cannot be given to the enemy. But the message has been delivered. America hits back, even now, even this soon. Yet the honest truth of spring 1942 is this: Japan is winning, not marginally, decisively. In the 4 months since Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Japanese military has seized a staggering empire. The Philippines fall in May. General Douglas MacArthur, ordered to evacuate to Australia, famously promises, "I shall return from a PT boat that barely makes it through Japanese patrols." Guam and Wake Island are gone. Hong Kong falls on Christmas Day 1941. Malaya and Singapore, the so-called Gibraltar of the East, the British Empire's proudest Asian fortress, surrender in February 1942 with 80,000 British, Australian, and Indian troops marching into Japanese captivity. Churchill calls it the worst British military defeat in history. Burma, the Dutch East Indies, Borneo, Sumatra. One by one, the dominoes fall. The Japanese Empire is now the largest in Asian history. It stretches from the borders of India to the Central Pacific, from the Aleutian Islands in the far north to the tropical archipelagos south of the equator. 70 million square miles of territory, ocean, and resource. The oil fields of the Dutch East Indies are producing. The rubber plantations of Malaya are operating. The rice paddies of Burma are under Japanese control. Yamamoto's 6 months are playing out exactly as he predicted, running wild. But even in the moment of maximum Japanese power, the cracks are there, hairline fractures, invisible to anyone not looking carefully enough. May 4th, 8th, 1942, the Coral Sea. For the first time in naval history, 2 carrier fleets fight. A battle without their surface ships ever sighting each other. Every blow is struck by aircraft launched from decks over the horizon. The USS Lexington is sunk. The USS Yorktown is badly damaged. The Japanese lose the light carrier, Shoho, and suffer damage to the fleet. Carrier Shokaku. Tactically, it's roughly a draw, perhaps a slight Japanese advantage. But the Japanese invasion force heading for Port Moresby, New Guinea, the stepping stone toward Australia, turns back. For the first time, a Japanese advance has been stopped. 1 month later, the fracture becomes a canyon. June 4th, 1942, dawn, 180 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands on the bridge of the carrier Akagi and faces a decision that will determine the course of the entire war, though he doesn't know it yet. His 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, represent the absolute elite of Japanese naval aviation. Their air groups are the most experienced, most skilled carrier pilots in the world. These are the men who flew at Pearl Harbor, the men who sank the Prince of Wales and the Repulse, the men who have never, not once, lost a carrier engagement. Nagumo's aircraft are loaded for a second, strike against Midway's land installations, when the report comes in. An American carrier force here, now, unexpected. He gives the order to rearm his aircraft, swap the land attack, bombs for ship-killing torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs. It is a process that takes time. Precious, irreplaceable time. His flight decks fill with armed aircraft, fuel lines, ordnance stacked in the open because there is no time to strike it below. The Japanese carriers are, for one terrible window of vulnerability, floating bombs. And 33 American dive bombers are already beginning their descent from 19,000 feet, undetected, perfectly positioned, arriving at the exact moment when Nagumo's combat air patrol has been pulled down to low altitude chasing American torpedo bombers. The torpedo bombers, devastators, slow and obsolete, have already died for this moment. 41 aircraft launched, 35 shot down, not a single hit scored. But they pulled the Zeros down to the wave tops, and now, falling from the sky like steel judgment, the dauntless dive bombers arrive. In 6 minutes, 3 Japanese fleet carriers are turned into infernos, the Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu. All 3 mortally wounded in a single, catastrophic moment. The 4th, Hiryu, launches a desperate counterstrike and puts 2 bombs into the Yorktown before American dive bombers find her as well, late in the afternoon. By nightfall, all 4 Japanese fleet carriers are either sunk or sinking. 250 of Japan's finest, most irreplaceable naval aviators are dead. Yamamoto, aboard the super battleship Yamato, 300 miles to the rear, receives the reports one by one. He orders the lights dimmed in his operations room. He sits in the near dark for a long time. His 6 months are up. He knows, with the cold precision of a man who has been right about everything he wished he'd been wrong about, exactly what comes next. The shipyards. The factories, the sleeping giant now fully, furiously, industrially awake. Because while Japan's 4 finest carriers are turning into pyres on the surface of the Pacific, something is happening 6,000 miles away in the shipyards of Newport News, Virginia, that Nagumo and his burning fleet can scarcely imagine. Steel is being cut, keels are being laid, and the first of the Essex-class carriers, a new breed of warship unlike anything the Pacific has ever seen, is 47 days from sliding into the water. January 1942, the shipyards of Newport News, Virginia. 3 m. The arc welders never stop. You can see them from the highway. Blue-white flashes strobing through the darkness, like a city that has forgotten how to sleep. The sound is constant, the rhythmic hammer of pneumatic riveters, the shriek of steel being cut, the deep percussive thud of massive hull sections being lowered into place by cranes that operator foremen call the big boys, cranes so tall their upper structures disappear into the coastal fog. The smell is iron and smoke and salt water and burned flux, and it is the smell of an empire being built in real time, shift by shift, weld by weld, through every hour of every night. The men and women who work these yards do not talk much about history. They talk about tonnage. To understand what America unleashes between 1942 and 1945, you need a moment of pure scale. Before Pearl Harbor, the United States Navy had 17 aircraft carriers, either in service or under construction. By the end of the war, that number will be 141. Before Pearl Harbor, the Navy operated 383 warships of all classes. By August 1945, that number will exceed 6,700. The United States will produce more ships during World War II than every other nation on Earth combined, and still have industrial capacity left over to supply its allies. But raw numbers don't tell the human story. The human story lives in the shipyards. In 1940, American shipyards employed roughly 170,000 workers. By 1943, that number is 1.7 million, 10 times. In 3 years, they come from everywhere, from the idled steel towns of Pennsylvania and Ohio, from the tobacco farms of Virginia and the Carolinas, from the wheat fields of Kansas and Nebraska, where the Depression has left entire communities with nothing to do and nowhere to go. They come speaking different languages, carrying different lunches, wearing different clothes. They are black men who have never been allowed inside a skilled trade union, but who discover that wartime desperation has temporarily, imperfectly cracked open doors that were welded shut before. They are women, millions of women, who have been told their whole lives that industrial work is not for them, who pick up welding torches and rivet guns and discover, to no one's surprise but their own, that they are exceptional at it. Rosie the Riveter is not a myth. She is a woman named Rosina Bonavita who, working a night shift at a Grumman aircraft plant in New York with her partner Jenny Florio, drives 345 rivets into a torpedo bomber wing section in a single 6-hour shift, a production record that stands for the duration of the war. She is a woman named Elsie McGill, the world's first female aircraft designer, who oversees the production of over 1,400 Hawker Hurricane fighters at a Canadian plant supplying Allied forces. She is every woman in every yard and factory who shows up, learns the work, does it faster than expected, and is told, at war's end, to go home and be grateful. But in 1942 and 1943 and 1944, she is the arsenal. Now, let's talk about the ships themselves, because the ships are where the story becomes something close to miraculous. The Liberty Ship program is, in pure logistical terms, one of the greatest industrial achievements in human history. The Liberty Ship is not a beautiful vessel. Maritime engineers of the era politely call it a simple design. Less politely, sailors who crew them call them ugly ducklings. They are boxy, utilitarian, built for cargo capacity rather than speed or elegance. A 5-hatch, 3-island design derived from a British tramp steamer, standardized to allow mass production with semi-skilled labor. They are also, by the standards of what one nation can produce in wartime, almost supernatural. Between 1941 and 1945, American shipyards built 2,710 Liberty ships, 2,710. At the program's peak, a new Liberty ship is launched every single day. Some weeks, the yards push 2 per day. The ships carry tanks, aircraft, ammunition, food, medical supplies, fuel, the physical substance of a global war effort that would be impossible without them. They supply Britain when German U-boats are strangling the Atlantic supply lines. They supply the Soviet Union via the Murmansk Run, one of the most dangerous sea routes in the history of maritime navigation, through Arctic waters patrolled by Luftwaffe, bombers and German submarine wolf packs. They supply MacArthur's island-hopping campaign in the Pacific, building the logistical chain that will eventually reach Tokyo Bay. Without the Liberty ships, the strategy doesn't work. Without the strategy, the war doesn't end. But if the Liberty ships are the sinew of American war production, the Essex-class carriers are the iron fist. The USS Essex herself, CV-9, the lead ship of her class, is laid down at Newport News on April 28, 1941, 7 months before Pearl Harbor. She is launched on July 31, 1942, commissioned into service on December 31, 1942, and arrives in the Pacific in May 1943. She is 872 feet long. She displaces 2,700 tons at full load. She carries 90 to 100 aircraft. She is armored, fast, and designed from the keel up around the lessons of carrier warfare, lessons written in the blood of the Lexington, at Coral Sea and the Yorktown at Midway. Her crew numbers 2,600 men. Her flight deck is armored. Her damage control systems are the most sophisticated afloat. She is also, crucially, the first of many. The Essex-class program ultimately produces 24 ships, 24 fleet carriers of the same class, built concurrently across multiple yards, their parts and systems interchangeable, their crews trained on identical procedures. When one is damaged, spare parts from the production line are already available. When one needs aircraft, the same type that equips every other ship in the class is on hand. This is the industrial logic that Japan cannot match and cannot answer, because Japan, magnificent as her naval engineering is, builds her carriers one at a time, by hand, by masters, like art. America builds them like Ford builds cars. Henry Kaiser understands this better than anyone. Kaiser is not a shipbuilder by training. He is a highway contractor, a man who built roads and dams, and didn't know the difference between a keel and a bulkhead when the war started. Naval traditionalists despise him for this. Admirals mutter about his lack of credentials. Old guard shipbuilders dismiss him as an upstart. Kaiser ignores all of them. He divides his ships into 250 prefabricated sections, built simultaneously in different parts of the yard, then assembled on the ways in a sequence, so precisely engineered that the process resembles a choreographed performance more than a construction project. He introduces the first all-welded ship hulls in American production, replacing riveting, which requires skilled workers, with welding, which can be taught to a previously unskilled worker in weeks. He builds worker housing next to his yards. He builds hospitals. He builds childcare facilities so that women with children can take the night shifts. He builds, in short, not just ships but the entire human ecosystem required to produce them, continuously and at speed. When a Japanese intelligence report reaches Tokyo in late 1942, describing Kaiser's production methods in detail, the officer who reads it reportedly sets it down, stares at the wall for a long moment, and then quietly asks to be transferred to a different assignment. He does not want to be in the room when the admirals read it. And yet, even now, even with all of this stirring and building and welding and launching, the men fighting the Pacific War in late 1942 are doing so with what they have, not with what's coming. On Guadalcanal, United States Marines cling to a jungle airstrip called Henderson, filled with the desperate ferocity of men who know that if it falls, the entire Pacific strategy collapses with it. They fight on half rations. They fight with malaria burning through their blood. They fight against Japanese night naval bombardments that turn the jungle into a strobing, deafening hell, bombardments so intense the Marines name one particular attack the night of the battleships, and speak of it the way people speak of natural disasters. The Navy loses more tonnage in the waters around Guadalcanal, a stretch of ocean that will come to be called Iron Bottom Sound, than in any other campaign of the Pacific War. But the Marines hold, and with every week that passes, every week of brutal, grinding, costly holding, the yards are launching. Every single week, something new slides into the water, something that will arrive in the Pacific eventually, with a weight and mass and firepower that the men bleeding in the jungle can barely imagine, and that the admirals in Tokyo are only beginning with growing horror to correctly calculate. The tide is not turning yet, but the tide is loading. November 1st, 1943. Iron Bottom Sound, Guadalcanal, 2:30 a.m. The destroyers come out of the darkness at 34 knots, 8 of them, Fletcher-class, the newest and most capable destroyers in the American fleet, cutting through the black water of the slot, between the islands at speeds that make their hulls vibrate like tuning forks. Their wakes phosphoresce in the tropical night, trails of cold blue-green fire stretching behind them in the darkness. On their bridges, young commanders, most of them in their early 30s, some younger, grip the brass rails and watch their radar screens, with an intensity that borders on religious. This is the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, and tonight, for the first time, the mathematics have changed. The Fletcher-class destroyer is, in the vocabulary of naval warfare, a statement of intent. She is 376 feet of pure aggression, longer, faster, and more heavily armed than anything Japan is currently producing at scale. She carries 5 5-inch guns, 10 torpedo tubes, and enough depth charges to make submarine commanders reconsider their life choices. She makes 36 knots in calm water. Her radar suite, the Mark 37 Fire control system, allows her to engage targets in complete darkness with a precision that her Japanese counterparts, still relying heavily on optical range finding and the naked eye, simply cannot match. She is also being built at a rate that defies comprehension. Between 1942 and 1945, American shipyards lay down 175 Fletcher-class destroyers, 175. While Japan struggles to replace the destroyers she loses, each one a months long. Construction project in yards, increasingly starved of steel and labor. America is producing Fletchers the way a factory produces appliances. The Bath Iron Works in Maine, the Bethlehem Steel Yards in San Francisco, the Federal Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Kearney, New Jersey. Yard after yard, coast to coast, all cutting steel to the same blueprints, producing the same ship, training crews to the same manuals. When one Fletcher is sunk, 2 more are already in the water. Japan has no answer for this arithmetic, but the Fletchers are only part of the story, because while the destroyers are being built, something far larger is taking shape in the yards, something that will redefine what naval power means in the Pacific and render every Japanese strategic calculation made before 1943 effectively obsolete. The Fast Carrier Task Force is coming, not one carrier, not 2. A force, multiple Essex-class fleet carriers operating together, screened by cruisers and destroyers, supplied at sea by a fleet of oilers and ammunition, ships and refrigerator ships that make it possible for the entire formation to remain deployed almost indefinitely without returning to port. It is, in the history of naval warfare, a genuinely new thing, a mobile, self-sustaining strike force of almost incomprehensible power that can project air power across 200-mile radius circles anywhere in the Pacific. Admiral Raymond Spruance, who commanded at Midway, understands what this means. Admiral Mark Pete Mitcher, who will command the fast carriers in 1944, understands it even more viscerally. The Pacific is about to become an American lake. But first, before the Essex carriers arrive in numbers, before the Fast Carrier Task Force becomes the unstoppable engine, it will become, there is a season of brutal transition, a season in which the old equipment and the new equipment overlap, in which men fight with what they have while what they need is still being welded together in yards 3,000 miles away. And in that season, men die in staggering numbers. August 1943, the jungles of New Georgia Island, Solomon Islands. Private First Class Eugene Sledge of the 1st Marine Division is not yet in combat. He is training, learning, absorbing the particular culture of a Marine infantry unit that has already been through Guadalcanal and carries its experience like a physical weight in the way veterans move, in the things they don't say, in the eyes of sergeants who have seen things that no training manual covers. Sledge will write about all of this years later in a memoir called With the Old Breed that many military historians consider the finest ground-level account of Pacific combat ever written. He will describe the particular smell of a jungle battlefield, the sound of Japanese night infiltration attacks, the moral and psychological cost of a war fought in conditions of heat and disease, and enemy fanaticism that seems, from the comfortable distance of peacetime, almost impossible to have survived. But in August 1943 he is still training, and the war is still balanced on an edge. In Tokyo, Imperial General Headquarters is beginning to confront, with increasing urgency, a question it has been avoiding since Midway. What happens when the Americans arrive in force? The question is not hypothetical. Intelligence reports, some from agents on the American West Coast, some from neutral observers, some from intercepts that Japanese codebreakers managed to partially decrypt, are painting a picture that grows more alarming with every passing month. New carriers, new destroyers, new aircraft, the Grumman F-6F Hellcat rushed into production specifically to counter the Zero, beginning to appear in American carrier air groups in significant numbers. The Hellcat deserves its own moment. Because the story of the Hellcat is, in miniature, the story of the entire American industrial war effort. The Zero, Mitsubishi A6M, is a masterpiece. Light, maneuverable, with extraordinary range, it has dominated Pacific air combat since the first day of the war. American pilots flying Wildcats, Buffaloes, P-40s have died in appalling numbers, learning its capabilities the hard way. At the start of the war, one experienced Zero pilot is worth, in raw aerial combat terms, several American pilots in inferior aircraft. Grumman's engineers know they cannot out-finesse the Zero, so they don't try. Instead, they build the Hellcat, heavier, more powerful, with a 2,000 horsepower. Pratt & Whitney engine that gives it a top speed the Zero cannot match in a dive. Armor protection that allows it to absorb punishment that would destroy a Zero. And 650 caliber machine guns that deliver a weight of fire that rewrites the terms of any engagement. The Hellcat is not an elegant aircraft. It is a blunt instrument, a sledgehammer designed specifically to break the sword. Grumman delivers the first production Hellcats in January 1943. By the end of 1943, they are producing 500 per month. 500 per month. Japan's entire aircraft production in some months of 1943 barely exceeds that number, and Japan must distribute her aircraft across fighters, bombers, reconnaissance, and naval aviation simultaneously. The Hellcat will ultimately achieve an aerial kill ratio of 19-1 against Japanese aircraft. 19 American victories for every Hellcat lost. But the kill ratio that matters most is not aircraft against aircraft. It is pilot against pilot. Because America can replace pilots, the training programs running at Pensacola and Corpus Christi and across the American South are producing thousands of new naval aviators. Every month, young men who arrive in combat. Squadrons already, trained to a standard that would have been considered exceptional before the war. Japan cannot replace pilots at anything close to this rate. The men who flew at Pearl Harbor, at Coral Sea, at Midway, the elite, the irreplaceable core of Japanese naval aviation, are dying faster than the training pipeline can replenish them. Every Zero that goes down takes a piece of Japanese air power that cannot be rebuilt. Every Hellcat that goes down is replaced before the week is out. December 1943, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Admiral Chester Nimitz stands on the dock at Pearl Harbor and watches the USS Yorktown, C.V. Dient, named for the carrier lost at Midway. A deliberate and pointed act of remembrance. Steam into the harbor with her new air group embarked. She is followed over the coming weeks by the Intrepid, the Hornet, the Franklin, the Ticonderoga. Essex after Essex after Essex. Nimitz watches them come and says very little. He is not a demonstrative man. He does not make speeches on docks. But the officers around him notice that he stands there longer than strictly necessary, watching each new carrier find her berth, his expression carrying something that takes a moment to identify. It is not satisfaction exactly. It is closer to vindication. Because Nimitz had kept faith during the dark months, during Guadalcanal, during the losses in Iron Bottom Sound, during the grinding, costly, heartbreaking months when the Pacific War seemed like something that might go on forever without resolution. He had kept faith not because he was blindly optimistic, but because he had seen the production reports, he had seen the commissioning schedules, he had known, with the cold certainty of a man reading a balance sheet, that the ledger was shifting, that it was only a matter of when. And now the when was arriving, Essex by Essex, Hellcat by Hellcat, Fletcher by Fletcher, steaming into Pearl Harbor with fresh paint and full magazines and crews young enough to think they might actually be invincible. They are not invincible. The Pacific will prove that many times, many ways, at terrible cost. But they are overwhelming, and overwhelming, in the mathematics of industrial war, is the next best thing. In Truk Lagoon, the massive Japanese naval base in the Caroline Islands, the so-called Gibraltar of the Pacific, the fortress that Japanese admirals have long considered impregnable, intelligence officers received the latest production estimates from their contacts in neutral countries. The numbers are passed up the chain of command. Admiral Minechi Koga, who has succeeded Yamamoto, killed in April 1943, when American fighters, guided by intercepted intelligence, ambush his transport aircraft over Bougainville, reads the estimates in his operations room aboard the super battleship Musashi. He sets the papers down. He does not underline anything. He does not add notes in the margin. He simply sits for a very long time in the particular silence of a man who is beginning to understand that the war he is fighting is no longer the war he thought he was fighting. The Americans are not rebuilding. They are not recovering. They are transforming. And somewhere in the yards of Newport News and Richmond and Quincy and Bath and Kearney, the next wave is already taking shape, steel ribs rising from concrete ways, cranes swinging through smoke-colored sky, welders' arcs burning through the night like cold stars descending to earth. The reckoning has begun, but it has not yet arrived. What arrives next will make everything that came before look like a rehearsal. January 29, 1944. The Central Pacific. Task Force 58. The horizon disappears. Not in fog, not in storm, in ships, standing on the bridge of the USS Yorktown and looking out across the Philippine Sea on a clear January morning. You can count carriers until you lose track. Great gray flat tops, stretching across the water in formations so vast that the men who see them for the first time, even the veterans, even the men who thought they had calibrated their expectations appropriately, find themselves standing in silence with their mouths slightly open. Task Force 58, Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher commanding. 6 fleet carriers, 6 light carriers, 8 fast battleships, 13 cruisers, 58 destroyers, 450 aircraft embarked. This is not a naval force. This is a floating nation. Mitcher is 57 years old, small and weathered, with a face like old leather left out in too many kinds of weather. He wears a long-billed lobsterman's cap instead of the regulation officer's cover because the sun bothers. His eyes, a quirk that his staff has long since stopped questioning. He does not look like a man who commands the most powerful naval striking force in the history of warfare. He looks like someone's grandfather who wandered onto the bridge by accident. But watch his eyes when the flight operations begin. There is nothing accidental there. Mitcher understands, better than almost anyone alive, what carrier aviation can do when it is unleashed at scale. He understands the geometry of it, the way multiple carrier groups can coordinate, strikes from different vectors simultaneously, saturating enemy defenses, overwhelming the ability of any fixed installation to respond coherently. He understands the logistics of it, the at-sea replenishment that keeps his force fueled and armed almost indefinitely, the maintenance crews who work through the night to keep aircraft operational, the steady pipeline of replacement planes and pilots that flows from the American training establishment like water from an open tap. He understands, in short, that what he commands is not just a weapon. It is a system, and systems, unlike individual weapons, do not tire. The target is the Marshall Islands. Operation Flintlock, the invasion of Kwajalein. Atoll launches on January 31, 1944, and it is, by any measure, a demonstration of American military power at a scale that would have been simply unimaginable 2 years earlier. Before the Marines and Army infantry go ashore, Task Force 58 spends 3 days, 3 consecutive days, bombing Kwajalein and the surrounding atolls with an intensity that transforms the landscape. 43 warships fire into Kwajalein Island alone, battleships that the Japanese believed sunk at Pearl Harbor, the Pennsylvania, the Maryland, the Tennessee, raised from the mud of the harbor, repaired, modernized, and now thundering. 16-inch shells into Japanese fortifications are among them. The symbolism is not lost on anyone. The ghosts of Pearl Harbor have come back, rebuilt and furious, to collect a debt. When the infantry goes ashore, they find fortifications that have been reduced to rubble, defenders who have been so thoroughly bombarded that many are found still in their positions, physically intact but psychologically shattered. The atoll that Japanese planners had calculated would take American forces weeks to capture falls in 4 days. 4 days. The same amount of time it took Henry Kaiser to build a Liberty ship. But Kwajalein is not the revelation. The revelation comes immediately afterward when Mitcher turns Task Force 58 toward a target that the entire Japanese Navy has considered untouchable. Truk. Operation Hailstone, February 17, 18, 1944. Truk Lagoon has been the anchor of Japanese Pacific strategy since the beginning of the war. A massive natural harbor in the Caroline Islands, ringed by coral reefs that make surface attack nearly impossible, defended by airfields and anti-aircraft batteries, and a garrison that has given Japanese commanders the comfortable certainty of invulnerability. American naval planners have spent 2 years treating Truk as an obstacle to be bypassed, a fortress too powerful to assault directly. Mitchell doesn't bypass it. He simply destroys it from the air. Over 2 days, Task Force 58 launches 30 strikes against Truk. American aircraft fly 1,250 sorties. They sink 3 cruisers, 4 destroyers, 3 auxiliary cruisers, 2 submarine tenders, 2 armed merchant cruisers, and 32 merchant ships. They destroy 270 Japanese aircraft, most of them on the ground, caught on their airstrips in the same posture of fatal unreadiness that characterized Pearl Harbor itself. The Japanese Navy has not been warned in time. The irony is exquisite and excruciating. When the 2 days are over, Truk, the Pacific's so-called Gibraltar, the fortress that anchored 2 years of Japanese strategic planning, has been effectively neutralized as a naval base. The surviving Japanese ships flee. The surviving aircraft disperse. The garrison hunkers in its bunkers and waits for an invasion that never comes, because Mitchell doesn't need to invade it. He has simply removed it from the strategic board. Task Force 58 turns and steams away. In Tokyo, the shock of Truk registers at the highest levels of government. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo faces the Imperial Diet, Japan's parliament, and delivers news that no Japanese government official has ever had to deliver before. The inner defense perimeter, the line that Japanese strategy had declared inviolable, has been breached. Not just breached, pierced effortlessly by a force that appeared from over the horizon and was gone before effective response could be organized. The questions that follow in the Diet are uncomfortable. The answers are more uncomfortable still, because the deeper truth, the truth that Tojo and the Imperial General Staff are wrestling with, in private while managing public messaging carefully, is not just that Truk has fallen. It is what Truk's fall represents. Task Force 58 is not the ceiling of American naval power in 1944. It is the floor. More carriers are coming. More Fletchers. More Hellcats. More of everything, in quantities that the Japanese production system, already straining under the weight of simultaneous land campaigns in China and Burma, submarine attrition of merchant shipping, and the slow strangulation of oil imports, simply cannot match. The Japanese economy is, by early 1944, beginning to crack at its load-bearing joints. Steel production is falling. Aluminum, critical for aircraft construction, is increasingly scarce. Aviation fuel is being rationed in ways that directly limit pilot training hours, creating a vicious cycle. Less training produces less capable pilots, who die faster, who require more replacement, who receive less training. The most lethal consequence of American submarine warfare is not the warships sunk. It is the tankers. American submarines, Gado-class, Palau-class, the best underwater warfare platforms in the world, have been prowling Japanese shipping lanes since the first days of the war. Early torpedo problems. The Mark 14 torpedo catastrophically runs too deep, and its contact exploder fails far more often than it detonates, have cost American submariners victories they should have won. But by 1943, the defects are fixed. And by 1944, the submarine campaign has become something close to a systematic dismantling of the Japanese economic system. Japan is an island nation. Everything she needs to fight: oil from the Dutch East Indies, rubber from Malaya, iron ore from China, bauxite for aluminum. Rice for her soldiers must cross the ocean in ships. American submarines are killing those ships. In 1942, American submarines sink 180 Japanese merchant vessels. In 1943, the number rises to 335. In 1944, it will reach 492. The tonnage being removed from Japanese service exceeds Japanese shipbuilding capacity by a margin that grows with every passing month. The oil that reaches Japan from the southern resource zone, the prize that the entire Pacific War was launched to capture, is being progressively reduced, tanker by tanker, to a trickle that can no longer sustain fleet operations at the scale Japanese strategy requires. Admiral Suemu Toyota, who succeeds Koga as Commander-in-Chief of the Combined fleet in May 1944 faces a brutal calculation. His fleet is running out of fuel. Not eventually. Not theoretically. Now. The super battleships Yamato and Musashi, the largest, most powerfully armed warships ever built. The pride of Japanese naval construction, each displacing 72,000 tons and carrying 9 18-1-inch guns capable of hurling a 300 to 500-pound shell 26 miles, sit at anchor in Tawi-Tawi in the southern Philippines because there is not enough fuel in the Japanese home islands to operate them from there. They must be based near their oil supply, which means they are based far from everything else. The mightiest battleships in human history rendered strategically impotent not by enemy gunfire, not by bombs or torpedoes, but by the patient, grinding, systematic work of American submarines, cutting supply lines one tanker at a time. The industrial logic is complete. The human logic, the cost in lives, in suffering, in the particular agony of men fighting a war their nation's economy can no longer sustain, is only beginning to be written. Because in June 1944, Toyota makes the decision that he knows he must make, and that he knows, with the clarity of a man reading his own death sentence, will probably not succeed. He commits the fleet, everything, all of it. The carriers, the battleships, the cruisers, the destroyers, every operational vessel in the combined fleet gathered from the anchorages and the fuel depots and the repair yards formed into a striking force and aimed at the American invasion fleet gathering off the Mariana Islands. The American target is Saipan, and Saipan, Toyota knows, cannot be allowed to fall. Because from Saipan, 1,500 miles from Tokyo, the Americans can reach the Japanese home islands with their new long-range bombers. The B-29 superfortresses, which are already even now being built, in factories, in numbers. The Battle of the Philippine Sea begins on June 19, 1944, and what happens in the skies above it will become known with the dark humor that combat aviators apply to their own mortality by a name that captures the absolute, devastating totality of what American industrial power has produced. American fighter pilots, flying Hellcats in numbers that Japanese aviators have never faced before, directed by radar and coached by fighter directors with a systematic precision that transforms aerial combat from a knife fight into a managed execution, shoot down Japanese aircraft in waves. Japanese pilots, many of them with fewer than 500 hours of flight training, rushed through abbreviated programs to replace losses that the training pipeline can no longer cover, fly into the waiting Hellcats with courage and without adequate preparation. They die in extraordinary numbers. In 2 days of combat, Japan loses 550 aircraft and 3 aircraft carriers. The Americans lose 123 aircraft. Most of those are lost not to Japanese guns, but to fuel exhaustion. Mitcher launches a desperate long-range strike late on June 20th, knowing his pilots will not have enough fuel to return before dark. He launches anyway. When the battered strike group returns, he makes a decision that every flag officer in the Navy has been told never to make in combat. He turns on the lights. Every light on every ship in Task Force 58, running lights, searchlights, landing lights, blazing into the Pacific darkness like a city suddenly appearing from nowhere, painting a perfect target for any Japanese submarine within 50 miles. Mitcher turns on the lights because his pilots are ditching in the dark ocean, and he will not let them drown in the dark if there is anything he can do about it. It is one of the most human moments of the entire Pacific War. His pilots will call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The name says everything, and in the shipyards of Newport News and Richmond and Bath and Quincy, in the factories of Grumman and Boeing and Bethlehem Steel, workers coming off the night shift on the morning of June 20th, 1944, do not yet know what has happened in the skies above the Philippine Sea. But they will. And when they do, many of them will feel something they will struggle to articulate, a complex, almost overwhelming mixture of pride and grief and the particular exhaustion of people who have been working themselves to the bone for 2.5 years, sustained by the belief that what they are building matters, and are now confronted with the evidence that it does. It matters. Every weld holds. Every hull that slides into the water carries the mathematics of inevitability forward one more increment toward a conclusion that Yamamoto saw coming before the smoke cleared over Pearl Harbor. The hammer has fallen. The question now is not whether Japan will lose. The question is what losing will cost, and the answer to that question will be written in fire, over the home islands, in the waters of Leyte Gulf, on the black sand beaches of Iwo Jima and the coral terraces of Okinawa, in the final terrible chapter of a war that a fleet of celebrating admirals set in motion on a quiet Sunday morning in December 1941, when they thought they had won. October 23, 1944. The Sibuyan Sea, Philippines. 8:10 a.m. The Musashi moves through flat water like a floating mountain. She is the largest warship ever built, 863 feet of armored steel, her main turrets each weighing more than most destroyers. Her hull so massive that the water displaced by her passage creates bow waves that smaller vessels must maneuver to avoid. Her crew of 2,399 men has served aboard her with the particular pride of sailors who know they are part of something singular. A ship so powerful, so heavily armored, so meticulously engineered that her designers calculated she could absorb any punishment. The enemy could deliver and keep fighting. Her designers were wrong. At 8:10 a.m., the first American aircraft appear on the horizon. What follows over the next 7 hours is, in the cold language of naval analysis, a systematic destruction. Wave after wave of American aircraft, Helldivers, Avengers, Hellcats flying top cover, arrive from the carriers of Task Force 38, the renamed and reshuffled descendant of Task Force 58. Now under Admiral William Bull Halsey, they come in coordinated strikes, each wave hitting before the damage. Control crews from the previous one have finished their work. Torpedoes tear open the Musashi's hull below the waterline. Bombs punch through her upper decks and detonate deep in her machinery spaces. She is hit by 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs. 19 torpedoes. She rolls onto her side at 7:35 p.m. and slides beneath the Sibuyan Sea, taking 1,023 men with her into water, so deep their bodies will never be recovered. The Musashi, the pride of Japanese naval construction, the ship that embodied everything the Imperial Navy believed about the supremacy of raw engineering over industrial quantity, is sunk by carrier aircraft. Aircraft built in factories by the thousands. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, which swirls across 3 days and 4 separate engagements from October 23rd to 26th, 1944, is the largest naval battle in history. It will never be exceeded. More than 200,000 men participate. 282 warships, 996 aircraft. The engagements stretch across a geographic area larger than France, encompassing 4 distinct actions that occur simultaneously across different bodies of water: the Sibuyan Sea, the Surigao Strait, Samar, and Cape Engano, connected by radio communications, and the desperate, imperfect decisions of commanders trying to manage a battle too large for any single mind to fully comprehend. Japan commits everything she has left. Admiral Toyota, ordering the fleet into action from his headquarters ashore, transmits a message to his commanders that is equal parts order and epitaph. With confidence in heavenly guidance, the entire force will attack. Heavenly guidance, because earthly mathematics no longer favor them. The battle's most extraordinary moment, the moment that will be debated by naval historians for the rest of the century, occurs off the island of Samar, where a Japanese surface force of 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers emerges from San Bernardino Strait and encounters the last thing anyone expects to find in its path. Taffy 3, 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts. These are not fleet carriers. They are small, slow, lightly armored vessels, Kaiser-built, mass-produced, designed for anti-submarine patrol and close air support, not fleet engagements. Their aircraft are armed with bombs and torpedoes meant for shore targets, not armor-piercing weapons designed to penetrate battleship deck armor. Their destroyers are outgunned so catastrophically that the engagement that follows defies any rational tactical analysis. The Japanese commander, Admiral Takeo Kurita, looks at what is in front of him and believes, initially, that he has found the main American carrier force. He has not. He has found the smallest, most lightly armed American naval group operating in the area. And what happens next is one of the most remarkable acts of collective courage in the history of naval warfare. The destroyers charge. 3 destroyers, the USS Johnston, the USS Hull, the USS Samuel B. Roberts, turn toward a Japanese surface force that outweighs them by orders of magnitude and attack. not defensively, not evasively. Directly. Commander Ernest Evans of the Johnston, a Cherokee Indian from Oklahoma, one of the finest destroyer commanders in the Navy, orders flank speed and drives his ship straight at the Japanese cruiser column, launching torpedoes and firing every gun he has, making smoke, drawing fire away from the escort carriers, performing what every officer on every Japanese bridge watching him must have recognized as an act of pure, deliberate self-sacrifice. The Johnston absorbs 3 14-inch shells and 3 6-inch shells within the first minutes of engagement. Her engine room is wrecked. She slows to 17 knots. She keeps fighting. For 2.5 hours, the destroyers of Taffy 3 fight a battle they cannot win by any conventional measure, and in doing so, they buy time. Precious, irreplaceable time for the escort carriers to turn away, launch aircraft, and begin the process of forcing Kurita's decision-making into a spiral of confusion and doubt. The Johnston is eventually sunk by massed Japanese gunfire. The whole goes down. The Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer escort, smaller than a destroyer, armed even more lightly, absorbs so many hits that her crew fights flooding with their bare hands, forming human chains to pass ammunition, continuing to fire until there is literally nothing left to fire from. Her survivors, in the water after she sinks, are strafed by Japanese aircraft. They tread water for 50 hours before rescue arrives. 49 of her 224-man crew do not survive, but Kurita turns back. This is the fact that everything else orbits around. The most powerful Japanese surface force remaining in the Pacific, a force that, had it broken through to the invasion beaches of Leyte Gulf, could have devastated the American landing operation and potentially altered the timeline of the entire Philippine campaign, turns back. The reasons are complex: confusing radio traffic, uncertainty about American dispositions, the unexpected ferocity of the Taffy 3 defense, which convinces Kurita that he is facing a far more powerful force than he actually is, the growing weight of American air attack, the death of the Musashi the day before, which has already demonstrated what American carrier aviation does to capital ships. All of these play a role, but underneath all of it, beneath the tactical confusion and the communication failures and the fog of a battle too large to see clearly, lies a deeper truth that Kurita cannot fully articulate but absolutely feels. Even if he breaks through to Leyte Gulf, American industrial power will replace whatever he destroys. The carriers he sinks will be replaced. The landing ships he destroys will be replaced. The aircraft he shoots down will be replaced, and his ships will not. Leyte Gulf costs Japan 3 battleships, 4 carriers, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. These losses cannot be replaced, not because Japan lacks the will, not because her engineers are not brilliant, not because her workers are not committed, because her steel is gone, her oil is gone, her trained pilots are gone. Her merchant shipping, systematically destroyed by American submarines, can no longer deliver the raw materials that a modern navy requires to build and fuel and arm itself. The Japanese navy that emerges from Leyte Gulf is, functionally, finished as an offensive force. What remains will be used in the months ahead in ways that speak more to desperation than strategy. October 25, 1944, the skies above Leyte Gulf. Lieutenant Yukio Seki adjusts his flight controls and begins his final descent. He is 23 years old. He was a Naval Academy graduate, a trained conventional pilot, a man who, by all accounts, would rather have lived. He has written a letter to his wife. He has eaten his last meal. He has made his peace, or tried to in the hours before dawn, with what he is about to do. His Zero is loaded with a 550-pound bomb that has been welded, not merely attached, to his fuselage. He is not coming back. The Special Attack Corps, Toko, the Divine Wind, the Kamikaze, launches its first organized mission on this morning, and Seki leads it. 5 Zeros, 5 pilots, 5 young men who have been told that Japan can no longer match American industrial production in conventional warfare, and that the only remaining arithmetic that favors Japan is the exchange ratio of 1 pilot and 1 aircraft for 1 American ship. His Zero strikes the escort carrier USS St. Lo. She sinks in 30 minutes. The Kamikaze is Japan's acknowledgement, written in human lives, that the industrial war has been lost. It is the weapons program of a nation that has run out of weapons programs. Think about what it means, really think about it, that a modern nation with a proud military tradition, with engineers of genuine brilliance, with sailors of extraordinary courage, arrives at the conclusion that the most effective use of its remaining air power is to crash its aircraft and its pilots directly into enemy ships, because the conventional exchange ratio has become so unfavorable that this is the only way to guarantee a hit. The kamikaze will sink 34 American ships and damage 368 more before the war ends. It will kill 4,900 American sailors. These are not trivial numbers, but in the context of American production capacity in late 1944, they are also not decisive ones. For every ship the kamikazes sink, the yards have already built replacements. For every sailor killed, the training establishment has already produced replacements. The mathematics are unchanged. What the kamikaze does accomplish, what it is uniquely and terrifyingly effective at, is human cost. Not strategic cost, human cost. The particular horror of a weapon that cannot be entirely defended against, that arrives without warning, that turns every dawn flight operation into a potential catastrophe, wears on the men of the American fleet in ways that production statistics cannot measure. Sailors who have served since Pearl Harbor, who have watched the industrial tide turn, who know intellectually that the war is won, still flinch at every unidentified radar contact. Still die, still grieve. Winning a war is not the same as not suffering. February 19, 1945, 10 a.m., the beach at Iwo Jima. The Marines go into the black sand. Iwo Jima is a volcanic island 8 square miles in area, sulfurous and ugly and almost entirely without strategic value except for one thing. Its airfields, which can provide fighter escort for the B-29s already bombing Japan from the Marianas, and emergency landing strips for damaged bombers that cannot make it back across the Pacific. For that purpose, airfields, 70,000 Marines are sent against 22,000 Japanese defenders buried so deep in the island's volcanic rock that the preliminary naval bombardment, the most intensive in Pacific War history, kills almost none of them. The battle lasts 36 days. The Marines suffered 26,000 casualties, 6,800 dead. The Japanese garrison fights almost to the last man, 18,000 dead, 216 prisoners. Admiral Chester Nimitz, in one of the most quoted statements of the Pacific War, says afterward that on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. He is not speaking rhetorically. He is reporting what he has seen. And even as the Marines die on the black beaches of Iwo Jima, even as the kamikaze pilots make their final calculations, even as the cost of the final approach, to Japan mounts in ways that sicken every commander who has to read the casualty reports. The yards are still launching. The last Essex-class carrier to be commissioned before the war ends, the USS Philippine Sea, is commissioned on May 14, 1945. In the time between Pearl Harbor and the Philippine Sea's commissioning, 1,254 days, the United States has built and commissioned 17 fleet carriers, 9 light carriers, 73 escort carriers, 8 battleships, 48 cruisers, 349 destroyers, 420 destroyer escorts, 203 submarines, and 82,000 landing craft. 82,000 landing craft, and 2,610 Liberty ships, and 297,000 aircraft, and 86,000 tanks. The industrial capacity of a nation of 130 million people, channeled with focused, furious, sustained purpose into the machinery of victory, producing, at its peak, more war material in a single month than Japan produces in an entire year. Yamamoto does not live to see any of it. He is dead by April 1943, ambushed over the jungle of Bougainville, his transport aircraft shot out of the sky by P-38 Lightnings, guided by decoded Japanese communications, killed cleanly and quickly in a way that spares him the knowledge of everything that follows. Perhaps that is mercy, because what follows is exactly what he predicted. The sleeping giant, filled with terrible resolve, does not merely defeat the Japanese Empire. It dismantles it, systematically, industrially, with the same methodical thoroughness that built the Essex carriers and the Liberty ships and the Hellcats and the Fletchers, applying American mass production logic not just to the tools of war, but to war itself. Island by island, ship by ship, life by life. The celebration in Tokyo on December 7, 1941, lasted one night. The reckoning lasted 4 years. And in the end, the single most important weapon America brought to the Pacific War was not the atomic bomb, not the submarine, not the carrier or the Hellcat or the B-29. It was a production schedule, a ruthlessly, relentlessly, unstoppably American production schedule that turned the impossible into the inevitable, one hull at a time, one weld at a time, in the arc-lit darkness of a nation that had decided with absolute finality that it was not going to lose. March 9, 1945, 5:34 a.m., 1,500 feet above Tokyo, Japan. The first Pathfinder drops its incendiaries at 5:34 in the morning. They fall in clusters, M69 napalm bomblets, each one the size of a pipe bomb, each one trailing a small cloth streamer that stabilizes its descent. And when they hit the wooden rooftops of Tokyo's Shitamachi district, the low city, the old city, the city of paper houses and timber workshops and family businesses. 3 generations deep, they do not explode so much as they ignite. Within minutes, the fires connect. General Curtis LeMay has made a decision that his superiors consider either brilliant or monstrous, and that history will argue about for the rest of the century. He has stripped the weight-saving armor and defensive guns from 334 B-29 super fortresses, loaded each one with 6 to 8 tons of incendiary bombs, and sent them in low, 5,000 to 9,000 feet instead of the standard 30,000. At night, when Japanese radar and fighter interception are least effective. The B-29 is itself a monument to American industrial ambition. It costs more to develop and produce than the Manhattan Project. Its Wright R-3350 engines are so temperamental in early production that crews refer to them as the most complicated engines ever put in an aircraft, and mechanics develop a particular nervous relationship with their maintenance schedules. It has a pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, a range of 3,250 miles, a bomb capacity that makes every previous strategic bomber look preliminary. And tonight, 334 of them are turning Tokyo into an inferno. The fire moves faster than anyone has calculated. Tokyo in March 1945 is a city that has been burning in slow motion for years, its resources stripped away, its young men gone, its food rationed, its industrial base dispersed into the countryside to escape precisely this kind of attack. The wooden residential districts that make up most of its urban fabric have been identified by American planners as catastrophically vulnerable to incendiary attack. The planners are correct. The fires merge into a single conflagration that generates its own wind system, a firestorm drawing oxygen from the surrounding air toward its center with a roar that survivors will describe as sounding like the ocean. The temperature at the center exceeds 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The Sumida River, which residents flee to for safety, boils in places. In 3 hours, 15.8 square miles of Tokyo are destroyed. 80,000 people die. Some estimates go higher. It is the single most destructive bombing raid in history, more casualties than either atomic bomb will cause. And it is the 4th night of a campaign. LeMay's crews will hit Nagoya the following night, Osaka the night after, Kobe after that. By the time the initial campaign pauses for aircraft maintenance and crew rest, 32 square miles of Japan's 4 largest cities have been reduced to ash. In the Imperial Palace complex, Emperor Hirohito rides in a motorcade through the ruins of his capital. He is 44 years old. He wears his military uniform. His expression, as recorded by the handful of officials who accompany him and who will later write their memoirs, is one of controlled devastation, a man trained from birth to reveal nothing showing everything. He says almost nothing during the tour, but when he returns to the palace, he tells his closest advisor, Marquis Koichi Kido, something that marks a seismic shift in the internal politics of the Japanese war government. He says that peace must be considered. In the Japanese Supreme War Council, the 6 chiefs, the men who actually run the war, the response to this sentiment is not unanimity. It is not even close to unanimity. The Army generals, War Minister Korochika Anami, Army Chief of Staff Yoshijiro Umezu, Army General Hiromichi Yahagi, are opposed to any surrender that does not preserve the imperial system, the military command structure, and national honor, as they define it. They speak of Ketsugo, Operation Decision, the plan for the defense of the Japanese home islands against the American invasion they know is coming. Ketsugo is a plan born of the same logic that produced the kamikaze. It calls for 10,000 kamikaze aircraft, assembled from every flyable airframe remaining in Japan, to be held in reserve for the invasion fleet. It calls for 3,000 suicide boats, small, fast craft packed with explosives, to attack troop transports in the landing zones. It calls for the arming of the civilian population with bamboo spears, with agricultural tools, with whatever can be placed in human hands, and the direction of those civilians toward the beaches to resist American infantry. Japanese military planners, projecting American casualties from the planned invasion of Kyushu, estimate American dead at between 250,000 and 1 million. American planners, working from the same data, arrive at similar figures. Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands planned for November 1945, is projected to be the costliest military operation in history. But the admirals and generals arguing for Ketsugo are doing their calculations with a critical variable missing. They know about the B-29s. They know about the carrier task forces, the submarine blockade, the loss of the merchant fleet, the oil shortage, the food shortage, all of it. They have watched their industrial base contract month by month, watched their air power drain away over the Marianas and the Philippines and the skies of Japan itself. What they do not know, what only a handful of Americans and a handful of physicists in a desert in New Mexico know, is that the production schedule has one final entry, one final line item in the American industrial ledger. Two of them, to be precise. July 16, 1945, 5:29 a.m., the Jornada del Muerto Desert, New Mexico. The Trinity test detonates with a yield of 21 kilotons. J. Robert Oppenheimer, watching the fireball rise above the desert floor, later recalls that a line from Hindu scripture entered his mind unbidden. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." General Leslie Groves, the Army officer who has managed the Manhattan Project from its inception, writes in his report to Secretary of War Henry Stimson that the test has been successful beyond the most optimistic expectations. In the desert, the sand beneath the detonation point has been fused into a new substance, pale green, glassy, radioactive. Scientists will name it trinitite. In the Pacific, the war continues. On Okinawa, the last major island battle, American forces are in the closing stages of a campaign that has cost 12,000 American dead, 110,000 Japanese military dead, and an estimated 100,000 Okinawan civilian deaths, a ratio of destruction that informs, with terrible clarity, what the invasion of the home islands would mean for everyone involved. The mathematics of Ketsugo and the mathematics of continued conventional bombing and blockade are converging on the same point. The point is unacceptable. August 6, 1945, 8:15 a.m., Hiroshima, Japan. Colonel Paul Tibbets banks the Enola Gay away from the target and pushes the aircraft into a sharp diving turn to put as much distance as possible between himself and what is about to happen. 43 seconds after release, at an altitude of 1,900 feet above Shima Surgical Clinic, the Little Boy device detonates. The yield is approximately 15 kilotons. The fireball temperature reaches several million degrees Celsius. In the city below, 70,000 people die in the first seconds. Another 70,000 will die in the following months from radiation sickness, burns, and trauma. 5 square miles of Hiroshima, the city's entire urban center, ceases to exist as a physical structure. Tibbets levels the Enola Gay and sets course for Tinian Island. Behind him, the mushroom cloud rises to 45,000 feet. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second bomb, Fat Man, a plutonium implosion device with a yield of 21 kilotons, detonates over Nagasaki. Between the two detonations, the Soviet Union has declared war on Japan and launched a massive offensive into Manchuria, destroying the Kwantung Army, the last large, intact Japanese ground force, in a campaign so swift and overwhelming that it collapses in days. The final walls are down. In the imperial palace, Emperor Hirohito makes the decision that his military commanders have been arguing against with increasing desperation. On August 9th, at a meeting of the Supreme War Council in an underground bunker beneath the palace, a bunker built because American B-29s have made the surface of Tokyo unsafe for even the emperor. The deadlock between the peace faction and the war faction is broken in an extraordinary way. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki asks the emperor directly for his personal decision. This has never happened before. The emperor does not make decisions. The emperor ratifies consensus. The entire structure of Japanese governmental decision-making is built around this principle. The emperor, as sacred symbol, elevated above the messy business of policy, untouched by factional struggle. Hirohito speaks. He says that continuing the war can only result in the annihilation of the Japanese people and the destruction of human civilization. He says that the unendurable must be endured. He says that Japan must surrender. The response of the war faction is not immediate acceptance. War Minister Anami weeps. Some younger officers plot a coup, a desperate, doomed attempt to seize the imperial palace, destroy the recording of Hirohito's surrender announcement before it can be broadcast, and continue the war through sheer force of military will. The coup fails. On the night of August 14th to 15th, War Minister Anami sits alone in his home, composes a final poem, and commits ritual suicide by cutting his abdomen. He leaves a note that reads, in part, believing firmly that our sacred land shall never perish, I, with my death, humbly apologize to the emperor for the great crime. He does not specify which crime, perhaps all of them. August 15th, 1945, noon at Japanese radio. For the first time in the history of Japan, the emperor's voice is broadcast to the Japanese people. Most Japanese citizens have never heard it before. The emperor's voice is considered too sacred for ordinary transmission. They gather around radios in homes and offices and in the streets, kneeling as the broadcast begins. The recording, scratchy and formal, and delivered in court Japanese so archaic that many listeners cannot fully understand the words, but they understand the meaning. The war is over. The reactions around Japan are so varied, so conflicted, so humanly complicated that no single account can contain them. Some people weep with relief. Some weep with grief. Some, soldiers in the field, garrison commanders on remote islands, officers who have built their entire identities around Bushido and imperial service, simply cannot process the information. Some will continue fighting for months, some for years. Hiru Onoda, an Imperial Army intelligence officer stationed in the Philippines, will not surrender until 1974, when his former commanding officer flies to the Philippines and personally orders him to stand down. In Tokyo, some civilians bow toward the palace and remain on their knees for hours. Others, quietly, with the particular relief of people who have been living through fire and rationing and air raids and the grinding, daily terror of knowing that the war is coming to their doorstep, feel something they will not say out loud for years afterward. Something very close to thankfulness. September 2nd, 1945, 9:02 a.m., Tokyo Bay, Japan. The USS Missouri, BB-63, a battleship commissioned in June 1944, representing the final generation of American naval construction, sits at anchor in Tokyo Bay. Her decks are crowded. Generals, admirals, photographers, war correspondents, representatives of every allied nation, press against the railings. General Douglas MacArthur, who promised he would return, stands at the table where the surrender documents wait. He is composed. He has been composing himself for this moment for 3 years and 4 months. The Japanese delegation arrives by motor launch and climbs aboard. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, wounded years earlier in an assassination attempt, climbs the ladder painfully on an artificial leg. General Yoshijiro Umezu, who argued for Ketsugo until the final hours, signs with visible reluctance, signs as if each stroke of the pen costs him something physical. MacArthur steps to the microphone. "We are gathered here," he says, "representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored." He speaks for 4 minutes. Then the signing begins. It takes 33 minutes to complete. 33 minutes to formally end 6 years of global warfare that has killed between 70 and 85 million human beings, a number so large it has no emotional reference point, a number that can only be approached through individual faces, individual names, individual mornings when specific people were alive, and specific afternoons when they were not. When the last signature is affixed, MacArthur steps back to the microphone. These proceedings are closed. Above Tokyo Bay, flights of American carrier aircraft, Hellcats and Corsairs, descendants of the production lines that turned the war, sweep in from the east and pass overhead in formation. From the deck of the Missouri, looking up at those aircraft, you can trace the entire story in the sound of their engines. Pearl Harbor to Midway, Midway to Guadalcanal, Guadalcanal to Truk, Truk to the Philippine Sea, the Philippine Sea to Leyte Gulf, Leyte Gulf to Iwo Jima, Iwo Jima to Okinawa, Okinawa to Tokyo Bay. Each step paid for in steel and blood and sweat, and the particular sacrifice of people who built things in yards they will never be famous for, who riveted sections of ships whose names they may never have known, who welded hull plates in the arc-lit dark of a midnight shift, while their children slept and their country asked everything of them, and they gave it. In Richmond, California, on the morning of September 2, 1945, a woman named Dorothy Johnson finishes her shift at Kaiser Yard No. 2. She has worked the night shift for 2 years and 7 months. She removes her welding helmet and walks out into the September morning, squinting in the pale California sunlight, her hands still carrying the particular roughness of sustained industrial work. Someone on the street tells her the news. Japan has surrendered. She stands there for a moment, just a moment, in the morning light. Then she takes off her work gloves, folds them carefully, and puts them in her pocket. She doesn't need them anymore. In the spring of 1942, when the outcome was still genuinely uncertain, when the Essex carriers were still months from commissioning and the Fletchers were still being riveted together in yards running triple shifts, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, the most powerful naval officer in America, made a remark to his staff that captures, perhaps better than any speech or document, the fundamental nature of what America was doing. "We are not just building a navy," he said. "We are building the certainty of an outcome." He was right. The shipyards didn't just win the war. They made winning inevitable, and inevitability, once established, is a force that no courage, no strategy, no sacrifice, no divine wind can deflect. The outcome was built in the yards, welded into the keels, launched into the water, and sailed in the end into Tokyo Bay.